Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michael McDonald. I'm proudly serving as your CEO, and happy New Year to you all. It's my great pleasure to help host this first webinar of the season, and today's webinar is going to be fantastic. It's about land, language, and legacy, and I have the great pleasure of introducing our panelists today. I'm also very lucky in that I've had the great pleasure of having met Alyssa several times and worked on her with some projects. So Alyssa M. General is a Mohawk Nation Turtle Clan from 6 nations of the Grand River Territory. She is an artist, an educator, and a language revitalist. Alyssa has helped to create a series of films, developed illustrations for children's television shows, and has received a national recognition for one of her poems. Alyssa has also worked as an artist-educator at the Royal Conservatory of Music, is a graphic designer with the 6 Nations Language Commission, and has worked on a language preservation project. She is also the artistic director with a publishing company called Spirit and Intent. Alyssa has also helped to advise the BTC on our Indigenous Healing Gardens project, and I know Alyssa to be an amazing mother and a very kind human being, and it's our great pleasure to have her today. Alyssa, over to you, and thanks for being with us.
Sego Michael and Yoa for your words. Sego sewa gwego, wagatsanini jigan idawis. Alasni waksanoda, Kanyen'kéha ni wako hojoda, waganyato da no oswego ni de wagano. Ganto wagyo daje, ne akiri honyanis ne radiksa ogo anekshi, gietnua ne gwanak ne riat the nunha ne ria. Dadnu, wagatsanini jigan iges. My name's Alyssa General. I'm Mohawk Nation Turtle Clan from 6 nations of the Grand River Territory. And yeah, I'm here to talk to you about land, language, and legacy. So I'll just hop to it. First of all, just to give you a little bit about who I am. Oh, sorry. There we go. So that's me. And I want to say like my basis in a lot of what I do is language work. I want to say it saturates so much of what I do when it comes to writing, if it comes to like any kind of arts practice, whether it's filmmaking or poetry or any of my artwork or artistic endeavors. I usually always try to keep it language based. So this is just a little bit of the work that I've done in the past, and these are some of the pieces that I've brought together that are inspired by the language. Because that's like a lot of at the core of what I do. And this is actually where I really started in and I want to say like in my language learning, but also in terms of I guess like how I came into being like so involved in I want to say like plants and ethnography and ethnobotany and stuff like that. So this piece here is a piece called Onkwawén, which is our Kanyen'kéha word for Niagara region. And that word actually means the neck. And if you think about it, it's because it's a conduit between Fort Erie and, or I want to say the Niagara River is a conduit between Fort Erie and Lake Ontario. If you're thinking that like Fort Erie is the mouth, drinking the water is flowing through the neck, and then coming to the stomach, which is Lake Ontario. And so this was one of the first pieces that was really inspired by legends. My father is an artist, and I'm not too sure if anybody's heard of him. His name is David M. General, and he has done a bunch of different monuments and sculptures and paintings. And so, like a lot of my childhood revolved around traditional stories. And as I came into language, I started to see a lot of those stories coming to life because the language is so descriptive. So this one is based on Onkwawén. This one here is based on revitalist, which is one of our words for a young man. And it basically means that he carries rust on his shoulders. And a lot of different speakers will say different things about this word because revitalist, like for him to carry rust on his shoulders, some say that it was from when our men had like shirts on and like they had their guns resting on their shirts and like they had like the color of the rust rubbing off on them. But kind of like going back further than that, one of the ways that I've heard it described is them having clay on their shoulders of the earth that they come from, which was rust colored. So it's talking about kind of like the identifying features that we used to cover ourselves in order to make ourselves recognizable by different nations. And yeah, so this was like that piece was inspired by that. But also I think there was so much talk at this time I had with different folks about how like important hair is into like in terms of our culture and like keeping our hair like long and straight, and then also having like this sense of good-mindedness, and where does good-mindedness come from, and having it come from like all of those different things in nature and in like, you know, kind of like even the realm of what we put into our bodies, like, and like the health of that as well, and like that connection that it makes to us and like how we feel. So I wanted to kind of like convey so many different things in it, and so my artwork is really reflective of many different artists that come into contact with, like my father, and also I'm a huge fan of Arthur Schilling's artwork, if you ever have a chance to take a look at his. But he used to be like weave, I want to say, a lot of characteristics of like animals and people and fish, and I thought that was such a beautiful way. So this was my first like attempt at it, like while I was studying the language. This piece is called Tóta, which is based off of one of the founders of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. He was an Onondaga chief, and he in the story, his name means, it's kind of like he's been swept aside, because he was so powerful that like people feared him a lot. And so like I painted this as kind of like having like a reflection of like him being swept aside. And I wanted to say like it kind of I wanted it to reflect that like there's like that, I guess, like that there was this kind of like unkindness done to him, and so he was like he be kind of like in the story he becomes kind of like a monster. So we so yeah, so with this artwork I just was kind of like trying to convey that like he was, you know, he's not in the full focus of this, so he's been swept aside in that way, and then also kind of like been not cared for as well, which is how the story goes. He's been kind of sequestered from his community. People are afraid of him, and so he kind of takes on these monster-like attributes, but later changes his ways and follows the Kanyen'kéha, which is known as the Great Law, and the founding of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. This one is one of my favorite pieces. It's based off of a woman named Jigusaze, and she was the first person to start to follow the Great Law. If anybody is like really ever curious about the Great Law of Peace, there is like so much writing and so much work that's been done on it. There's a great PBS special that's on it as well, and kind of goes over the breadth of that story. But basically, the story is about how all of the five nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy came together under this concept of peace, and how we kind of, I want to say, buried the hatchet essentially, and made peace with each other, and kept and established that as well. And I'll kind of get into how the language fits into that as I want to say is like a huge piece of how that legacy is carried on. So this woman, her name is Jigusaze, and it means that she has a new face. So I kind of wanted to bring her face forward out of that. And it's interesting because like not too much is known about her. One of the last people I believe to own the title was from Lewiston, she passed in Lewiston, I should say. But a lot of the research that my sister and I had done, because this is part of our book Spirit and Intent, for which our company is named. But some of the remnants that we know about her is that she was Lynx clan. So like I said, like it was just kind of like I'm wanting to like bring the language out in a lot of the artwork that I do. So I'm just trying to make it as present as possible. And yeah, so these are some of the pieces I started with. This is just like, I wanted to say, like, I'm gonna scan out here if I can. There we go, perfect. So this is some of the other works that I've done. Oh, sorry about that. There we go. Some of the other works that I've done up here, different pieces based on different things. And this is one of the videos that I created that like, essentially like this was my first dip into editing and filmmaking. And I won't play it in its entirety. I'll play a little bit of it, just because it's like for time's sake, just to kind of move on and get into the plant stuff. But yeah, there's this great program that's in Six Nations called Kentyóhkwa. And they were working with Zoe Hopkins. I'm not too sure if anybody's ever seen her movies. She created Run Woman Run, and she's she's just done so much awesome stuff. And she's a speaker and really wanted to give back to the community and created these awesome, fun resources that are Kanyen'kéha, fully in our languages. And yeah, so this was a part of the videos that we had come together to make with her, which was featuring Kanyen'kéha, the songwriter. His name is Jeff Doreen, or Gurdu, and he had done a cover of well, it's called Jidan Hunji, but he had done a cover of the Beatles' Blackbird. So I'm just going to play just a little snippet of it just so you can get a see, and I can provide the link afterwards. I'll just stop it there. But yeah, this was my first delve into filmmaking. And so it was like cool to like run around and get all the shots, but then also to be working on this and seeing how I want to say like how a lot of like a lot of songs and like when mixed with language just like really help enforce for younger students coming, like for younger speakers coming up. My daughter used to watch this and she used to sing along with it, so I thought that was like a really beautiful process of language transmission. So, oh, I already did this part. So going back into, so yeah, so like a lot of my work that I've done has been in teaching and in education and in language. I started working at the Kentyóhkwa, which is the Everlasting Tree School, which is a Waldorf-based Mohawk immersion school. And I want to say like a lot of coming into that work because the school is, I want to say like we base a lot of like our teachings outdoors and through ceremony and through storytelling, and want to say like through connection to nature. And because so much of that lives in the education that, and like the quality of education that's given to the children, I had to do like a lot of learning and a lot of researching. So I want to say like my real big delve from language to education to like art to storytelling really came through in the work that I did here. And I want to say like, because like I want to say COVID really super amped things up in terms of like, you know what, maybe we need to be focusing like at this time then at bringing in like teaching children like, okay, what are some medicines that you can go outside and you can collect for yourself, or what are some of the things that like we can be teaching our students to be looking for in terms of like, whether it's the time of the year, or whether it's the time of the year, or whether it's kind of like, I want to say different like phenomenon that is happening out in like in the world at the time. And so one of like, I want to say like, I'll give an example of this. So my daughter goes to this school. She goes to Enkonte'nikonhrakwaríhsya'te, but she also has a wonderful teacher, and her teacher was going through the Ohkwá with them. And the Ohkwá is a story about basically this giant bear that has been terrorizing this village. And what this bear does is that he comes in and he destroys everything and kind of will like take off. And then these hunters are trying to track him down and figure out where this bear is going. So what ends up happening in this story is as they go into the sky chasing the bear, because this bear like jumps into the sky, they chase after him and they shoot the bear, and as the blood kind of comes down and hits the leaves start to change color, which for us culturally represents the time of year that you would have to like I want to say like start to go hunting, or like start to prepare to go hunting. So my daughter like decided that she was going to step outside and like go for a walk and go for like, just to go play outside for a little bit. And as she kind of like stepped outside, she like kind of paused, and then she turned around and she came back in. I'm like, oh, what happened? Is it raining or something, or like what's going on? And she's like, I'm wearing my coat's deer colors, and the sumac's turning red now. I start to change the jacket I wear, which is incredible, like that you have like a child that's able to go outside and read the land like that. Like, oh, it's hunting season. We're gonna have to change like the colors because the colors I'm wearing are deer colors, so brighter colors so hunters can see me, which is incredible. Like I think that's in such in a way of, I guess, like in tuning with being so in tune with nature, and within, like, I want to say, like taking a lot of what the stories that you've grown up with, what they're telling you, and really taking that into heart, I think is reflected so much through that, through like how our children relate to the world around us, and then how they and how, what lessons are they learning from that as well. So I kind of, that really, I want to say, kickstarted me into, like, I've always been into stories, but it made me want to look into our stories a little bit with a different lens. So from my work with there, I kind of started to get into more plant stuff. And yeah, like it just kind of, I'll get into that as we go along, but I'm just kind of slowly walking you through a little bit of all of that right now. So but yeah, so like that's part of reason why, like, I started to get into storytelling as well. And the storytelling weaves into the reason why I started to get into plants. So for those of you who don't know, and I better best explain this now, is like Kanyen'kéha has a verb-based language. It's polysynthetic, which means that it's based in relationships. So and this kind of means that like words come together a lot like a puzzle, and it often reflects like the purpose, action, imagery, or connection with it. So like I'll get into some of the ways that this comes together, but I'm going to kind of show you how the language comes together first. And also I wanted to say, like, okay, Mohawk is not the hairstyle. Inspired by, and these were our traditional territories. This is where we currently are today, which is 6 nations. And these were all of the span of our traditional territories, which goes all the way from Buffalo to Albany. And so this is where we were traditionally situated, and you can see like the contemporary reserves like Wahta and Tyndonega and Akwesasne, Gahnawaga and Ganasatage. There's a couple more, I think Ganyange is there as well. But these are all where our traditional territories lie. And so I have already given you one of these hints. I'm going to ask everybody in the feed if they can share in the chat the letter that they think it is. I'm going to pull this up. So our first one is going to be Ontario. So everybody's going to put in a letter that they think that it is. So like Ontario. Does it mean a nice river? Does it mean, actually, I'm not too sure if everybody can do that. Okay. Just a second. I'm not too sure if everyone can do that, but we can definitely try, or maybe we can throw it in the Q&A, but I'm not 100% sure. That might not work. Or is it working in the chat? Oh, okay. It's working in the chat. Yay. Okay. So everybody is saying, so I'm seeing a lot of D, a big lake. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your responses. All right. So we have a nice river, D, or B, a nice land, C, a nice lake, or D, a big lake. So I'm seeing a lot of D. There is a ton of D. So the word for Ontario is actually Ganyadario, which means a nice or a pretty lake. So it would be C is our answer. And the way that kind of works, so like, so anytime you see like this, like R-I-O, like it's like a Rio, and like R sounds make a mixture of an L and an R sound in Kanyen'kéha, but basically like anything that ends with that yo usually means that it's good. So Gatnikonhrakwaríhsya'te, Ganyadario, yo, like Wanizario, like a nice day, a nice lake, like Sungwet Dio, you're a nice person. All of those end with io, which is like basically meaning that it's nice, or the suffix meaning that it's nice. So the next one that we'll do now is I'll do this one first because we already talked about it. So Niagara, does it mean A, it falls, B, tall water, C, lots of water, or D, the neck? Oh, yeah, and I'm seeing lots of, yeah. Good job, everybody. You guys were listening. Yes, Onyagara means D, the neck, and it's referring to this spot and basically how, like, if Fort Erie is the mouth, the Niagara River is the neck, and Lake Ontario or Onyadardio is the stomach. So we're gonna pop over to this one. So Toronto, tree, does it mean A, trees and water, B, standing trees, C, a tree, or D, place of the trees? Okay, I'm seeing some A's, a D, a few D's. Oh, okay, all right. Okay, so for this one, it is actually trees in water. So there's a different ways to say Toronto. So some people say Jitkarundo, or some people say Adarundo. And basically it means like Garunda is our word for a log or a downed tree. And this O suffix is basically intonating that it's in the water. So Jitkarundo, because like that's where like a lot of the logs were brought down into Lake Ontario to like float in the water there. So from like the logging up north. So that's how that's all connected there. So that's the reason why. So a lot of our language intonates like the purpose as well. So like we have different instances. So we have a nice lake, we have like the neck, so very descriptive of what that body of water is doing or what it looks like, or in this case like also like something historic that happened there. And I think everybody will probably know this one. I think there was like a heritage moment on this on this particular word. So Canada, does it mean a majestic land, B, a beautiful land, C, a settlement, or D, a longhouse? So somebody said C, a settlement, A, majestic land. Oh, lots of mixtures of different answers in this one. All right. So the answer is actually C, a settlement, or like, so it can mean like a town, a village, or anything like that. So if I'm like heading into town and I'm telling my daughter this, I'm like, Ganada gonyase or yange. Ganada gonyangé, I'm gonna go into town. So that's like, yeah, that's our word for like a village or a settlement or like, or kind of like anything, yeah, and in town basically. So yeah, that's like that is our language. That is how it works. And I just had wanted you to see that there were actually like you're familiar with a lot of Kanyen'kéha words without even really realizing it. And there's like, I want to say there's probably a lot more here, is like a lot more than we think about here as well. Like if you go into the States, it's incredible the amount of like of Haudenosaunee Confederacy language you hear, like places like I know that's called, they call it Kana Johari, but it's Gana Joharege, or like, you know, like there's just so many. It's like I could go all day talking about places in upstate New York that have like that host our names still, which is incredible. And but yeah, like I want to say like no matter where you go, you hear it, Tonawanda, you know, like Ticonderoga, all of these names. And it's so cool because like I remember when I first started language learning and when I was first starting to travel like a lot more into the States, I remember going through and being like, oh, I wonder what that word means. And then I know what this one means and I know what that one means, but what is this one? So it's just really cool to kind of like take a look at those. I want to say like, as if like when we have those words, it creates more of a connection, whether it's historically, whether it is, you know, culturally, or even whether it's like just based on what we saw in the landscape. It just creates like another lens for us in which to like connect to like, I want to say not just our heritage, but also to like connect to our like our culture and to connect to like the land itself and what was the purpose of this land, or what was like the relationship that we had with this land, because we were recognizing different things in it, whether it was beautiful, it had this unique feature to it, or whether it was like something like a place that certain things happened. So it's just really interesting once you get into like language learning. Like I'll give you one example, and it's probably my favorite word, but the word for Dundas is like Anuararetsaragayune, which means the place of the old hats, which I think is so interesting. And I've always wanted to delve into the why is it called that? Like, why is it called the place of the old hats? But there's once you start unraveling like what the language is actually saying, you get so much complexity out of it and so much connection out of it, which is really what, like I said, this language is based in relationship. So continuing on. Yep, for some reason my screen wants to, there we go. Alrighty. So we're going to play a little game. And for this one, I'm going to explain how it works. And well, actually, I've got the explanation here. So this is basically what a polysynthetic word means, or polysynthetic language. So we're going to play a game, and what the game is you're going to create a word in Kanyen'kéha, and I'm going to tell you what it means. And so what we're going to do here is I'm going to get you to pick a prefix, and then you're going to pick a black root word and a descriptive suffix, which are green. So you're going to put a blue word next to a blue word, next to a black word, next to a green word. And I'll give you an example here. So I'm going to write Yonusio. And you don't have to like put in like the upstress or downstress. You can just write it as is. So I wrote in Yonusio. And I'm not too sure if it shows up in there. It might, it may not. But anyway, Yonosio. But basically that means a nice house. So yo is these prefixes, blue prefixes in particular, are known as objective prefixes. And basically they're, I want to say like they just basically mean that you have no control, like almost like no control over it. It will just be this thing. Or maybe not like no control, because like usually it's like a word that we use, like, or I want to say a prefix we use when something is happening to us and we don't necessarily have control over it. Whereas if we have red prefixes are usually us to something else. So like this is like this transference of relationship. So the blue prefix intonating that something is happening to us that we have no control over, or red prefixes that have are intonating that we are doing something to something else. And then we also have transitive prefixes, which mean they're basically happening between two or more groups of people. But for the sake of just doing this, we're looking at these ones. Oh, so I got some already. So there's Yokohondio. Oh my gosh, lower accent. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly go through some of these ones because I'm seeing them pop up. So we have yo, yago, ro. So yo is it to it. So it is happening to something living. Like it could be a plant, it could be like a flower or like an animal. Yago is her, it to her. And ro is it to him. So we have, I'm going to go up here. Yago hundio, she has nice grass. So ohunde is our word for grass or green. And yo is our word for yoyanale. So if she's done a nice job on her, like with her flowers and in her garden and on her lawn, then like you could say, oh, yago hundio. Or if she's got a really nice garden, she's got really nice greens growing in her garden, like yago hundio. Yago werlaksa. Oh no. Okay, so owerda is our word for air. And so yago is it to her, and raksa means bad. So in this case, it'd be like she has bad air, but it also could mean she has bad gas. So that's the way that works. So lower raksa is about the same thing, but he has bad gas now, or bad air. Rohun daksa, he has bad grass. Maybe he didn't water his grass that year, or maybe it was a really dry season. Yogohunt duggerdas. They have smelly grass. So uggerdas is our word for to like stink or smelly. But yeah, like yogohunt duggerdas is that word for yeah. They have smelly grass, and rohunt dio, he has nice grass. So that's the way that the language comes, like pieces together, and how it creates more description about whether somebody has something, or like whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it smells, whether it's like beautiful. Like there's all of these different ways that the language kind of comes together, and in one word describes all of these things. And this is like the longest word in Kanyen'kéha is dakwa. And basically what that word means is black stove polish. But what it means is like dakwa, that it means like the thing that heats the house. And then stas dakwa. So the thing that you use to make black and shiny, the thing you use to make black and shiny for the thing that like heats the house. So it's like the thing you're making it black and shiny basically, but it's referring to the stove, but it's also descriptive. Like it's like really taking, I want to say like a lot of like, I want to say the use or the relationship of the word, and then kind of like putting it into context. So like, you know, it's not just a stove, it's the thing that heats your house, or a furnace in that case. But when you're looking at, I'm going to say like so many different words. Like I remember one of the first words my teacher asked me, what does that actually mean in English? Like, what does it mean? And he said, what does table mean? Can you tell me what that means? And I was like, no, I have no idea what the word table means. And he goes, well, in Kanyen'kéha, it's adequara. And adequara means like it's where you put the food, where you set it up. Or like, there's so many other words that like when you kind of like get into it, like I love the word for like woodpecker, which is gordondorox, which means like it kind of like it I want to say like it like almost like hits at the wood, or hits at the tree. So all of this is really descriptive, but it changes the way that you see relationships and things. And I think one of my favorite examples of this, like by far, is our word for like our food, or our sustainers, which is like Kentyóhkwa, which means like Kentyóhkwa means basically that it gives you life. It gives you sustenance, or like strength, or not, maybe not so much strength, but just gives you life. And so when you were looking at it, but when you look at our word for gadungardiaks, which means that I'm hungry, gadungardiaks means it's destroying my life. Which I think that is so funny, and I think that is so clever, like, and so interesting in telling that, like, you know, like what is the opposite of these things that are life-giving? There's these things like, you know, your body gets to the point where it's destroying your life because you're hungry, which I'm pretty sure like a lot of us, you know, feel when we're hungry. So just taking a look at this like one more time, just kind of bringing it all back together. So one word can be a whole sentence. So in here we have raya daggerdas. So him to it. So because like it's, in this case, we're using a red prefix because it's a matter of opinion. He could smell great to somebody else. So raya daggerdas. So him to it. Body, which is the black prefix here, yat, raya daggerdas. And aggerdas at the end here means smelly. And so when you put this all together, it's he stinks or his body is smelly. So yeah, so we just played with a way that like of putting all of this together. But yeah, this is how it works. This is how it kind of like you go about like this is I guess like the basics of how the language comes together. So, and looking at this and like why exactly is this important? And there's this really great hypothesis out there, which is called Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. If anyone has ever seen the movie Arrival, it's one of my favorite movies. They had a linguist work on it from McGill. Her name is Jessica Kuhn. She is amazing and doing so much awesome work with in helping with Kanyen'kéha language revitalization. And the concept basically is that the idea that the structure of a language determines the native speaker's perception. So when you're looking at that, if you're looking at your food as life sustainers, or as the thing that keeps you alive, that totally changes your relationship to it. It's no longer, you know, like just this thing that you have to go get. It's not a thing anymore. It's something that is incredibly important to your survival. And so that totally changes, I want to say that completely changes the outlook there. And so I put this beautiful piece of like Christy Belcourt's artwork up because I wanted to show that interconnectedness thing of everything. So this insight into indigenous languages is important because it cultivates a deepened relationship with the natural world. And that's in so many things that we look at. And this is part of like I want to say like when I started to really realize like, you know, like, oh my gosh, even the word Dewagatohunjoni, and my language experience, it looks like it should mean like I make it for myself from the earth. But the fact that the word earth is part of a need is incredibly important. And looking at the way that our culture is built. So I'm not too sure if my little picture of myself pops up there, but when we're looking at all of these different words for, oh, there's something popped up in the chat. Oh, sorry. When we're looking at these words, so when I introduced myself, using my language, and these were some of the words that I said. So, Niwago it means that the type of earth that I'm from. So we have like this Ohunja right here is talking about like the earth. And when we look at that, when we say like what our nation is, we're actually referring to the area in particular. So Kanyen'kéha, a lot of people say that it's people of the flint. I've also heard people of the chert. And one that really resonated with me was people of the crystal, because like this crystal in particular, which is referred to as a Herkimer diamond, is actually I want to say like it is formed from chert, which is like, you know, like forms flint too, but it this crystal here is only found in our traditional territories in like Fonda, New York, where you find Herkimer, New York. You know, there's like Ganajohaleges there as well, and it is found through the Adirondacks. So when I'm talking about this, I'm saying I'm a person from this area, from this specific region. So I'm saying that is the type of earth I'm from. Niwagitoroda, this is the type of clay I come from, which comes from our traditional stories, because like in our traditional stories, it's talked about how Sagwaya Diso made us from clay. And so it's like, this is the type of clay that I come from. And it's also, I want to say like this relationship to like the story of how the founding of our clan system. And like, you know, because like where do you find clay? You find it in the river. And that's where like in the story, the women go to, and that's where they find their clans. And as I said before, Kentyóhkwa, our life sustainers, is our word for food. So I want to say like, when you're looking at this and when you're saying, you know, like when I say my nation, and when I'm saying like all of these things are connected to not just story, but they're also connected to land in such an incredible way. And this is like one of the hugest reasons why I believe that if you like learning a Haudenosaunee language really changes, or like not even just a Haudenosaunee language, you could be learning like any indigenous language, but this is like an incredible reason for why it's so important for the longevity of our planet, is because when you're looking at this, is like, this is the type of earth I'm from. This is the type of clay I'm made from. And these are our life sustainers. It totally changes the way that you think about the world around you, and you think about your place in it. So coming into this, like I'm actually a forager as well. I didn't put that in any of my bios, but like this is kind of like where I came to in learning a lot of like our traditional stories, and looking at a lot of like I love hiking, and I grew up in a forest. So one of my friends used to joke, she's like, she grew up in the densest Carolinian forest you could possibly grow up in. And I really like loved that description of the area I grew, like my home basically. And because I was raised with stories and art, and And with so much plant life around me, it was a passion I always had, and it was something I was always working on. And as I like grew up, like I like I took the language. I worked at Guyanaze, which is it's a native plant restoration nursery here in Six Nations. And then I kept learning, and I kept learning about plants, because like I want to say, like, the words that we have for plants are so incredibly interesting. And we have like, and it's, like they pop up in stories, but we don't often, like, I want to say, like, for most people, stories are a form of entertainment. And for us, we have to remember, because our language was never written. A lot of our language, is passed on orally. And so, like, if that's the case, then that means that a lot of our stories hold more than just like entertainment value. They also hold knowledge of when to pick plants, what are these plants used for, or like, or the names of like what they look like. So I'm just going to give you some examples here. So and I'm just going to read what my little blurb here of, like, this way of looking at the relationships described by the language often brings into insights into other areas, such as plant names and purposes. So this one is, interestingly enough, so this over here, Jonarat dawa esto, which means that it pierces the leaf. And so if you take a look close up here, you can see that, like, the leaves are being pierced by the stem, and this is bone set. So yeah, so there's like these different ways that the language really intonates, like, okay, like there's these plants out here, and they're being pierced by the leaves. And then, so like, it's been interesting, because like I've been working with a team from Plenty Canada, and the wonderful Jessica Dolan and Dr. Jessica Dolan, and some of the things that, like, we find, like, in terms of like the story, or in terms of like the language used to describe the plants, is like so incredible and so thoughtful. And so in some of the other work I've done, like, and actually in both projects, there's a group here in Six Nations that was looking at Frederick Wilkerson Waugh, who is an ethnographer, and did a lot of research in Six Nations. And so we've been looking at his files, both as plants and then also as stories as well, because he recorded stories, but he also recorded plant knowledge, which is incredible. And they're both connected, which is, I think, really interesting and fascinating. So one of the stories that he talks about is, we have a winter spirit. His name is Ato. And basically, in one of the stories, it talks about a plant. And it's interesting, because in the language, they use the Kyugo word for it, which is jisundak, which is Gatniohandesa and Kanyen'kéha, meaning strawberry. And we're like, why did he use strawberry? Strawberries aren't even out at the end of winter, because that's when the time frame of the story happened, is at the end of winter. And I was like, why would he be talking about strawberries? Like, what is another thing that comes out in the spring? Or why is it saying Jusunda? And so then we looked at the Latin name of it, which is Potentilla canadensis. And then as we were like researching it, you research it and you find it looks like a strawberry, but it's not a strawberry. I cannot remember actually what the English name is. I think it's not false strawberry, it's something like that. But basically it comes up in the early spring, and it was in this story, it's traditionally used as kind of like a medicine to ward off the cold, and what you would take after kind of like winter's over. So it's all of these little things. So like, it gave you a timeline from when this plant appears. It gave you a description of what it looks like and what it's akin to. But it couldn't be that thing. Like, we know it couldn't be strawberry, because it's not the season for it. So it had to be this other plant that looked like it. And it does look a lot like a strawberry when you're out in the bush, and like, you're like, okay, why is it up? Why is it out right now? But yeah, and it has like very similar looks to the strawberry, but it's not a strawberry. So yeah, those are the ways, like, the kind of like the stories and the language and the plants are all connected to each other. This one is probably one of my favorites. So if you look over here, there's a picture of a sycamore tree. There's the fluff from the tree, which is dropped from the seed pods. And there is mullein right here. and a pair of socks. You might be wondering why they're all connected, but when I was doing some research for I was actually a graphic designer and I was working, but I was doing research and on this like on I want to say like on like our traditional territory. So I went on a trip and I went to go visit some friends in Onondaga. And while we were there, we went for a hike. And one of my friends, he asks me in the language, like, oh, like, how do you say sycamore in your language? And I was like, oh, and I don't know that. I'm not too sure. I'm like, I know all like a lot of other tree names, but I don't know that one. And then he's like, oh, he's like, I always think it's weird because he's like, I'm trying to remember I'm trying to understand why it's related to socks and mullen. And I'm like, they're related to socks and mullen. And he's like, yeah. He's like, these like it's a dat dit sat gona. And I was like, and he had taught me enough of their language, so I was like translating it over in mine. I'm like, oh, like adder dat dit ser adder dat dit goa. He's like, yeah, or like adder dat dit ser wana. He's like, yeah, that's the one. And I had to think about it for a second, but I started laughing because I'm like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense because like when I worked at Guyana's, they had everybody mask up and like, you know, I had to wear gloves when you were working with the sycamores because they kind of like exfoliate, but they're like, they release this kind of like fluff that makes you itchy. They kind of like referred to as like being like working with insulation. And so I was like, that's so funny that it's like something that's like kind of like itchy, but it's like referring to like these two plants that have like these fluffy itch, or a plant and an object that have these like this fluffy itchy quality to them. So yeah, so like the word that we kind of know today, and it's actually a pretty old word, like aderlati sort, like, so we don't really know like what aderlati is like quite like what it's referring to, but because it's a little bit archaic, but I thought that was super funny that it was like that pairing of words in particular, that it's like the big fluffy itchy thing, or the big itchy thing kind of. And so coming over to our last one, this is Jack in a Pulpit, and the word for this one is oh my gosh, I think I can't remember if it's Nikarhunha'a or Garhatgoa or Garhungoa. I think it's Garhungoa. But this plant in particular is named after a cradle board. And we were trying to like, I remember sitting there thinking like, why would it be named after a cradle board? But I realized like, oh, but it's like holding a little baby inside it. And it's the same shape as that you would have like as a cradle board. So I put a picture of a cradle board here as just as a reference of how that works and what that looks like. But yeah, so that's tying these two things together of like what you see, like what did our ancestors see in the plants that we were working with, or that we were surrounded with, and how did we describe that, either that look or that responsibility or any of those things. So just coming down to the last little bit of my presentation. So I'm like, the ideas embedded in the language, like they're basically like about relationship and responsibility to the earth. Like in turn, and want to say like the artwork, the storytelling, the ceremony, the actions, all in turn like saturate the culture with the same spirit and intention, with that want and that invoking of like a relationship and responsibility in earth. And it shows up in, you know, I have like, it's artwork, storytelling, activism. It shows up all over. And like, you know, like that is the reason why, like, you know, we had like, there was like the Meech Lake Accord No, or why there was like there's Standing Rock, or, you know, like why the artwork. I'm not too sure if you've ever looked at like done a comparison between like, you know, like maybe the artwork of like Michelangelo and somebody like Norval more so. But when you look at that, like you can't separate it from the natural world. It is so tied to it. It is so connected to it. It is a part of it. And we are too. We are too, and we are so reliant on it. This is my father right here. This is a piece that he did when it's actually at the Billy Bishop Airport. So if you ever have an opportunity to go there and take a look at it, it's a beautiful piece. And I'm gonna like, and it's like there's an Anishinaabe name for it, but I can't quite remember it. I know it's called the Gathering, but basically he was talking about, he goes, what gathered here before people? And he was talking like thinking about like animals, and like he was like wanted to depict these animals like you know, the animals fishing instead of the humans, and because he wanted to call back to like what was originally there. And I feel like a lot of like our art thinks about that. Like what are we a part of? What are we um how are we connected? Like this is on my favorite piece of Arthur Schilling's artwork, and you can see like there's little animals in his hair. There's like and this is like there's another piece like this one, and they like there's people attached to him, and it all is like this, it all in all it's like this message of like, and I say it right here, like a deepened connection and understanding of our relationship to the land and our relationship as stewards of it to protect and safeguard her gifts for the future generations. And that's like how I want to say like language impacts all of those things, you know, like how our stories impact all of that history, and like why we do the things that we do today, why we stand up for the land, why our artwork is such a depiction of like our connection to it, and like how like we've, I don't know how to describe it, but just like almost like even how our agreements, we hold our agreements between nations, between people, why we kind of like, I want to say like we call that back to remind ourselves, like this is a piece like called the Hiawatha belt, and this symbol is known for like, I want to say like it's become the representation of our people, and it's basically like the collection of like all of those nations that came together and made the agreement, all of these nations representing all of the lands that they came from, and it's a story, it came from like, you know, like that lives through a story, that lives through this art piece, like that is the wampum belt, which is an agreement. And so like all of these things come together and they really reflect like that, you know, like what our relationship is to one another, what our relationship is to the land, and how do we protect that, how do we protect both, like, you know, like the, I want to say like the land for future generations, but also how do we protect each other, and how do we like protect our humanity, because like a lot of that story for the Hiawatha belt was talking about that, it's talking about like the black around it represents war and death, but that coming together represents light. And so these are all like like it's, I think I want to say like I think it's always so inspiring that like our language is about connection, because I think we are in a society now where like we are very individualistic, where we are kind of like you know, like we may not be so worried about our neighbor anymore, but like that's, I remember hearing before a long time ago that like, you know, like it's not love and hate, it's love and fear, but it's actually like fear and understanding. And it's like we, out of those connections we build vulnerability, and out of vulnerability we build trust, and that is one of our most like, this is like to trust the land to take care of you is such a huge connection. And that's what I think we should get back to. And that's like, and I guess that's, and that ties up the end of my presentation. So yeah, so nyawa goa zewa gwego nyawa ji wezewa dohun sadade jino hoda wa geri wayan geri wa getsko datnyo nyawa goa.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. That was incredible, and I know we all learned so much. We're going to open it up for question, and you can type your question into the chat or into the Q&A. So you've got some great thanks so much for the lessons. But I wonder, there was a comment before, just to, and maybe I'll elaborate on that. Someone's, you know, Karen says, wonderful that so much of the language has survived. But I also understand, Alyssa, that you have to do a lot of work to uncover that language or rediscover it. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about your process for doing that? And then an additive question, have you ever had to create a new word before? And you're on mute, by the way.
So in recovering the language, that was a huge process. So I started I actually had no interest ever in learning my language. It was that's a I will say that because when I was younger, I saw other people learning along like all my like some of my peers, and it was like that's not my responsibility. Good job on you. And it wasn't until I left and actually moved to Fort McMurray, Alberta, and the couple I stayed with were fluent Blackfoot and fluent Dene speakers. And it was that at that moment I'm like, I should really be learning my language because I didn't realize that there was a gap in transmission. So none of their grandkids spoke, none of their children spoke. And so it kind of like made me realize that like I know what, maybe I ought to be learning the language for myself. So when I came back home, I enrolled in Onkwawén. I think I was 21. So and I've been at the language, like I've been studying it for about, I want to say like 16 years, 15, 16 years. And so if I'm dating myself, but but yeah, it's been an ongoing process. And I want to say like sometimes like the language Onkwawén is an incredible program. And I really had to do, I want to say like I really had to prioritize my language in order to become a proficient speaker in it. So like putting myself in situations that like especially as like to be a teacher as well, because like there is this want after you're done a program, you don't have that same interaction with people all the time. So it's like you need to keep that language alive by living in it basically. So I that's why I became a teacher, is like to push my language along as well as impart what I knew. And so in doing that, like I boosted my language up a lot, but like I'm always like I want to say like language learning is always like an ongoing thing. Like it's always like I want to like it. I'm like I will never say that I'm fluent. I will say that I'm proficient in the language, but I'm not fluent because like I know so many people who are like above my level and incredible speakers. But coming back to what you were saying though about like the like have ever had to make up words, and basically that's what Onkwawén kind of helps you do. Like so there's this idea called like circumlocution, which means basically that you're if you don't know a word, you can beat around the bush to get to it. So I'm like, oh, you know, like if I don't know the word for he's rich, which some speakers would say radigwatse, I would be like, oh, like rawistagade, he's got a lot of money. Which like that speaker could understand, but a speaker can understand, but they like it may not be what something that a first speaker uses, but it makes you understandable. So yeah, you definitely, I want to say there's definitely like create lots of word creation happening that goes like that happens. And you also kind of like I remember we didn't have a word for an inhaler and I have asthma, so I was saying Kentyóhkwa, which means like it helps you breathe. And I remember talking to a first speaker and being like, does that make sense? And she's like, well, it helps you breathe, so yeah, like that's a good word for it. But or you use it to breathe rather. So it's, yeah, there's definitely some word creation that has to happen because like um yeah, some of our words that we have like are a lot older, and then we're from a generation of speakers that may not have the technologies that we have right now. But like it's cool to hear like what everybody how everybody comes together and figures out what might be the best possible word for that.
That's lovely. Well, thank you. There's a question in the chat that someone's asking, well, what would your word for trail be?
Oh, trail, like Oyana. So like if you look at the word Guyana there, it means a new path. And but like some people might say Ohahaze too, which is like a Ohaha is like a road. Oyana is like a like almost like a path through like a forest. So yeah, Oyana.
That's lovely. And someone's asking, Alyssa, can you share any information regarding any workshops or lectures if people wanted to learn more about plant medicine and your language?
I'm not too sure. Well, I think you mentioned one before that's coming up with Robin Wall Kimmerer. And like,
Right.
or no, what is it? Is it Robin Kimmerer Wall? I can't remember her name fully, but like the braiding sweetgrass writer. So that one would probably be a really good workshop to take a look at.
Okay, and
I
and
want to
I
say
can
that.
share that with the members as that comes online for sure. And then I know we've only got time for one more question, but somebody's asked how many speakers are there of your language? Do you have a way to quantify that?
There is like a document out, I believe if you look at Six Nations Polytechnic, they have I believe, like the last count of speakers. And like, so in terms of L1 speakers, we almost have like, I think there might be 2 still on the territory, which means like first language speakers. But the yeah, like it's like it not a lot, but like it want to say that it's starting to grow a lot more. And
Okay. And one final question. Do all of the Six Nations speak the same language, or are there differences?
no, there's subtle differences. So like if you have like Mohawk language, for an example, is I want to say like I don't want to say it's like the fullest, but it's like a really filled out version of the language. So like if you say like got nue dezeno, it's kind of funny because it's like the fullest in the east, and as you slowly go west, it starts to like become very different. So like next to us is Oneida, and Oneida is still very close. So if I was saying got nue dezeno, they would say got nue deze.
Okay.
And so it's like just little variations like that, or like how I said adat dit gona is like adat dit serdawana in Kanyen'kéha. So there is like a very like they're all kind of connected, and you can understand each other quite like easily. But it does like take like a little bit of like fine tuning to really like. I remember one speaker being like, speak just a little bit slower, like because he was speaking Hugo and I was speaking Mohawk, to tell like so he could figure out what exactly I was saying. So yeah, so it is they are very close.
That's amazing. Well, Alyssa, thank you so much for sharing your time and your talent and your wisdom with us. I know this was incredible, so thanks to you, and we wish you all the best. I know we'll be working together on our Indigenous Healing Garden, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Nyawa for having me.
All right, take care, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks again. Happy New Year.
Ona.